Today we see the start in earnest of Operation Early Dawn. Now, on the off chance that you've been living under a rock for a while, the Operation Early Dawn is basically the government's way of freeing up space in the prisons by releasing certain prisoners early. Typically it was that you had to serve a minimum of 50% of your original sentence. They've actually reduced that to 40% to allow thousands potentially of prisoners to be released from prison early to free up additional prison spaces. The first prisoners released under this scheme will be released today. Now, it is worth noting that Operation Early Dawn isn't actually a new concept. It was first used by a previous government many years ago. However, Labour have resurrected this controversial plan in order to free up prison spaces for what they believe to be more serious and more dangerous criminals. There's widespread reporting in the news today about the potential criminals that could be released under this scheme, including ones that we may consider to be a continuing and ongoing threat to the public and to those people around them. Amongst the first wave of inmates that could be released under Operation Early Dawn is Connor Shaw from Rotherham. He will only now actually serve 13 months of his 32-month term, despite strangling his partner and threatening to throw acid in her face during many years of abuse. And actually this release comes in spite of the fact that his victim, his former partner, said in court how she would be scared when he is released, as there would be no repercussions and he'll want to get revenge on me once he is released from prison. It's fairly safe to say, I would suggest, that this person does pose a threat to her at least, if not to wider society. Shane Riley from Swansea, another inmate who is set up to be released early under this scheme, will be released after serving less than 9 months of his original sentence, and he was sentenced for domestic abuse for punching, kicking and headbutting his ex after she broke up with him in 2020. Again, this to me sounds like someone who is a danger, not necessarily just to that one particular person, but maybe to the wider community. Riley has been on record as saying he was enjoying the abuse. He enjoyed attacking his ex-partner and was originally sentenced to 23 months for actual bodily harm, common assault, making threats to kill and criminal damage. However, he will serve less than 9 months behind bars under this resurrected scheme by Labour. Now, I just want to take a moment to compare these particular cases and these particular sentences to one that I reported on quite recently. That was the case of David Spring. He was one of the so-called, by the press and by the powers that be, not by me, so-called far-right thugs who took part in the protests and the so-called riots after the murder of those 3 girls in Southport. Now, if we remind ourselves of the crimes committed by David Spring, he was arrested for chanting "Who the fuck is Allah?" and later at the police, "You're not English anymore," and for, and this is read verbatim, waggling his finger in an aggressive manner towards police officers. Sorry to interrupt the video, just wanted to say a quick thank you to everyone who supports the channel. If you haven't done so already, then I do ask that you kindly click the subscribe button down below. 97% of people who watch these videos aren't currently subscribed, which is crazy, right? It's totally free. You can change your mind and there won't be any hard feelings if you choose to unsubscribe at a later date. If you do find these videos useful and you want to help me out, you can buy me a beer by clicking the link in the description below, and that also would be very much appreciated, particularly in this hot weather. Anyway, back to the video. Now, if we consider that the previous offenders, who are quite clearly a threat, if not just to individuals, but to the wider society, who have been convicted for actual violent crimes, for causing injuries, for causing trauma, for causing actual bodily harm, David Spring, for the use of supposed offensive language and for waggling his finger in an aggressive manner, was sentenced to 18 months in prison. Now, under this new scheme, he will of course be eligible to come out in all of about 7 months. However, we shall wait and see whether two-tier Keir and the two-tier justice system treats this man in the same way. After all, he has been seen shouting hurty words. I spoke about another case, a guy who will now take up one of these newly freed up prison spaces, who was being imprisoned for sharing cartoon images on Facebook. He was imprisoned for 3 months simply for sharing and commenting on images on Facebook that were deemed to be offensive to people with certain protected credentials. One last example of prisoners who could potentially be released today under this scheme. Jordan Green. He was put behind bars in March for dangerous driving and for burglary. He was jailed for 27 months after an effective carjacking where he tapped on the window of a woman's car and he said, "Get out the f***ing car." And he is liable to be released from prison after just 4 months. The list goes on and on. Drug dealers, violent offenders, gang members, all due to be released under this scheme to make space in the prisons. Now, I understand, of course, that there is a shortage of prison spaces. However, it seems that the powers that be, the ruling classes, and in particular our Prime Minister, seems intent on almost immediately refilling these spaces with people whose crimes are somewhat less significant, dare we say, than those that are being released. But it's not just the immediate threat to former victims that we should be considering when we talk about the release of these prisoners early. A lot of these prisoners will have been part of gangs whilst inside. They are actually having to specifically choreograph the release of these hundreds or potentially thousands of prisoners in order to ensure that rival gang members from inside the prisons aren't brought into contact with each other, as they expect that would cause further violence, further criminality, and probably having to put them back into some of the spaces they've recently freed up. It's also deemed that there might be a significant rise in homelessness, because the people being released from prison early don't have anywhere to go. There is the logistical issue of literally taking these people out of prisons, which may be quite a substantial distance from where their crimes were originally committed and where they previously lived, and put on transport for them to ensure they get to where they need to go. It is completely understandable that we had an overcrowded prison system. There needed to be something done in order to ensure that people who were a genuine danger and a genuine threat to others, to individuals and to society as a whole, were kept out of harm's way after they had committed a crime. However, the ways and means by which they are going about this in the form of Operation Early Dawn seems to be incredibly backwards in its thinking. They are releasing known, dangerous criminals who it is already expected are liable to go on and commit crimes again, in order to replace them with people on trumped-up charges that many would deem offer no real threat to society at large. Time will only tell how much of a success or dismal failure Operation Early Dawn is. However, the early indications show that it is poorly thought out and hurried in its execution in order to fulfil a mantra and fulfil an agenda set out by our two-tier government and our two-tier policing system. Good luck, everyone. Stay safe and stay sane.